She had it all at 30 years old. Olivia Bennet Whitmore was the wife of a financial titan, the soon-to-be mother of his heir, and the envy of San Francisco's elite. Her life was a meticulously curated masterpiece of penthouse sunsets, designer gowns, and lavish charity balls. But on a stifling July afternoon, just 8 weeks before her due date, she stepped into her marble-clad sanctuary to find her masterpiece defiled. The betrayal wasn't just the presence of another woman. It was the sight of the mistress sprawled in her private space, draped in the silk of her own custom-made pajamas. What Olivia did next wasn't in any high society playbook. There was no screaming, no tears. There was only a chilling calm that marked the beginning of a war that would fracture an empire and stun everyone who thought they understood her. The air in the penthouse was always the same. A precisely maintained 72 degrees, perfumed with a subtle custom blend of white tea and gardenia that cost more each month than most people's rent. It was an atmosphere of serene, untouchable wealth, a testament to the world Henry Whitmore had built and the gilded cage Olivia Bennet Whitmore inhabited. On the afternoon of Friday, July 11th, 2025, Olivia returned home earlier than expected. Her final prenatal appointment with the esteemed Dr. Hugh Eleanor Grant had been unexpectedly quick. "You and the baby are in perfect health, Olivia," the doctor had said, her voice warm but efficient. "He's strong, just like his mother." Olivia's hand rested instinctively on the taut swell of her belly. A boy, Henry's heir, the missing piece in the Whitmore dynasty puzzle. She had smiled politely at the doctor, but deep down, exhaustion had gnawed at her for weeks. Sleepless nights she'd hidden behind perfect makeup, gnawing fears that her polished world was slipping through hairline cracks no one else could see. She felt that familiar blend of deep love for the life growing inside her and a hollow awareness of her role in a grander, colder design. The private elevator opened directly into the vast foyer of their 75th floor apartment overlooking the Golden Gate. The silence was the first anomaly. Usually, she'd hear the faint hum of the staff or the muted drone of Bloomberg TV from Henry's study. Today there was nothing but the low whisper of the climate control. A pair of unfamiliar, ridiculously tall stilettos, a gaudy shade of crimson, lay kicked off carelessly by the console table, scuffing the polished Italian marble. A knot of ice coiled in Olivia's stomach. For a heartbeat, her vision blurred with a rush of dread and disbelief. A helpless question pounding at the back of her mind. Could this really be happening? But she forced it down, her lungs dragging in shallow, bracing breaths. She moved silently through the grand living area, her custom maternity dress a soft sigh of fabric against her skin. The room was a monument to Henry's taste. Stark white walls, museum-worthy abstract art, and furniture so minimalist it seemed inhospitable. It was a space meant to impress, not to comfort. Her own touches, a vase of her favorite Casablanca lilies, a cashmere throw, felt like fleeting apologies in the vast, impersonal gallery. The door to their master bedroom suite stood slightly ajar. From within drifted a low, feminine giggle, so out of place it struck like a physical blow. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to tilt, the carefully constructed reality of the past 5 years thinning to a fragile, transparent film. She pushed the heavy oak door open, and there she was. A young woman, no older than 22 or 23, with bottle-blonde hair and a body sculpted by a gym and a surgeon's knife, perched brazenly on the edge of their bed. But that wasn't the detail that made Olivia's blood run cold. The woman was wearing her pajamas. Not just any pajamas. They were a set of pale silver silk pajamas, custom-made for Olivia by a designer in Paris, with her maiden initials O.B. delicately embroidered in platinum thread on the cuff. A gift from her mother, a piece of her old life, her old identity she had stubbornly clung to. The woman was admiring her reflection in the vast mirror opposite the bed, running a manicured hand down the silk, claiming it as her own. And standing by the window, a smirk playing on his handsome face, was her husband, Henry Whitmore. He was still in his bespoke suit from the morning, looking every bit the master of his empire, watching the scene unfold with an air of entitled amusement. The blonde looked up, her blue eyes widening in momentary panic before settling into a defiant glare. Henry's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance, not guilt. Just annoyance that his perfect afternoon had been interrupted. "Olivia," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, as if she'd just walked in on a board meeting. "You're home early." The air crackled with 1,000 unspoken words. The betrayal was so brazen, so viciously disrespectful, it went beyond mere infidelity. The pajamas were a declaration. They screamed, "I'm not just taking your husband. I'm taking your life. I'm stepping into your skin." A tremor of old insecurities, the fear that she had always been replaceable, ornamental, easily traded for something newer, clawed at the back of Olivia's mind for one last second. Then, like paper to flame, it burned away, leaving only steel. In that moment, something inside Olivia snapped, but it wasn't the soft break of a heart shattering. It was the cold, precise snap of a steel trap closing. The tears that pricked at her eyes were not of sorrow, but of a sudden, searing rage that made everything painfully clear. The vague anxieties, the lonely nights, the feeling of being a beautiful ornament in a glass case, all of it converged into a single, razor-sharp point of purpose. Everyone, Henry, his sycophantic circle, even her own family at times, had underestimated her. They saw Olivia Bennet, the socialite wife, the polished accessory. They had forgotten Olivia Bennet, the woman who had built her own thriving PR agency from scratch before she ever met Henry, the woman whose mind was her greatest weapon. She looked past the girl on the bed, her eyes locking onto Henry's. The shock everyone expected to see on her face wasn't there. There was no hysteria, no screaming accusation. Instead, her expression was one of unnerving, preternatural calm. She drew a slow, measured breath, her hand never leaving the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. When she spoke, her voice was neither a whisper nor a shout, but a clear, level command that sliced through the tension like a shard of ice. "You," she said, her eyes flicking to the blonde for the briefest second, dismissing her completely. "You have 60 seconds to take off my pajamas, leave them on the floor, and get out of my home." The girl, who had been bracing for a screaming match, visibly recoiled. She looked at Henry, searching for a cue, a rescue. But Olivia wasn't finished. Her gaze shifted back to her husband, pinning him where he stood. "Henry," she said, the name dropping from her lips like a cold, hard stone. "You and I have an appointment with our lawyers. I'll have my brother Julian schedule it. We're going to start the process of dissolving our assets." Henry's jaw tightened. This was not the script he'd prepared for. He was the master of control. He was the one who managed crises. "Liv, let's not be dramatic," he started, stepping toward her, his tone dripping with condescension and forced calm. "You're hormonal. You're not thinking clearly." It was the worst thing he could have said. A dismissal of her intellect, her emotions, her entire reality. Olivia offered a small, chilling smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Oh, Henry," she said softly, "I have never in my entire life thought more clearly than I do right now." Without another glance at either of them, she turned her back. She walked out of the bedroom, her posture impossibly straight, unshaken. She didn't slam the door. She didn't run. She moved calmly back to the foyer, picked up her purse from the console table, and stepped into the private elevator, leaving behind the ruins of her marriage and the two stunned figures in the master bedroom. As the doors slid shut, sealing her inside a capsule of silent steel, she did not look back. She wasn't fleeing a disaster. She was executing a strategic retreat. The war had only just begun. The elevator's descent was a silent, 75-story drop back to reality. Olivia didn't tremble. She didn't cry. Her mind, finally freed from the fog of compromised love, was a storm of crystalline clarity. The shock had seared the wound shut, leaving behind a hard, unyielding scar of purpose. When the doors opened into the hushed marble lobby of the Whitmore Tower, the doorman, a kind-faced man named Charles, hurried forward to assist her. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything all right? You're back down so soon?" "Everything is perfect, Charles," she said, her voice calm and even. "Could you please hail me a cab, not one of the house cars?" The request was small but unmistakably significant. The house cars, the drivers, they were all threads woven into Henry's world. She was already cutting the ties. As she stood beneath the grand awning, the San Francisco heat rolling over her in a humid wave, she made her first call, not to her mother who would cry, or her father who would explode. She called the one person who combined the protective ferocity of family with the surgical precision of a litigator. "Julian," she said the moment her brother picked up. "Liv, what's wrong? You sound..." I'm fine, she cut him off, her tone allowing no argument. I need you to do something for me. I'm on my way. Where are you? The Fairmont. Book me the presidential suite. Use your personal card. I want nothing traced back to Henry for now. There was a pause. Julian Bennett was not prone to emotional theatrics. He was one of San Francisco's most ruthless attorneys, a shark in a tailored Tom Ford suit. He processed, calculated, and acted. Consider it done. What happened? He had someone in our bed, Julian. In my pajamas. She delivered the sentence with the cold finality of an autopsy report. She could almost hear the click in his mind, the lawyer shifting into the protective older brother. I see, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I'm 5 minutes from my office. I'll meet you at the hotel in 30. We start the paperwork tonight. What paperwork? Olivia asked, though she already knew. The war, Julian answered grimly. And Olivia, I'll find you the best divorce attorney in this city. Not just competent, a butcher. I already have a name in mind, he said. Helena Vaughn. She's who you hire when you want to leave your spouse with nothing but regrets. She's a piranha. Perfect, Olivia said just as a yellow cab rolled to the curb. Book her. She ended the call and slid into the cab's cracked vinyl back seat, giving the driver the address of the Fairmont atop Nob Hill. As the taxi merged into the relentless river of San Francisco traffic, she allowed herself a single backward glance at the Whitmore Tower, a gleaming spike of glass and steel that had been her gilded prison. It looked cold, impersonal, a monument to a life she no longer claimed. A small, buried ache twisted once in her chest, the last ghost of a woman who had once believed this tower could protect her. She let it die quietly, replaced by a resolve hard enough to cut diamonds. Then, alone in the rattling cab, a tremor of doubt scraped at her ribs, a fleeting, sick fear that the stress might harm the baby growing inside her. She pressed a hand to her belly, breathed deep, and reminded herself she had to hold together, at least until he was safe. She felt no nostalgia, only a sharpened resolve. She arrived at the Fairmont not as a wounded wife seeking shelter, but as a general securing her forward operating base. The staff, long accustomed to the whims of the city's powerful elite, didn't bat an eye. As a visibly pregnant woman checked into one of the hotel's most expensive suites with no luggage, no one so much as blinked. The suite was magnificent, a world apart from the cold modernism of her penthouse. It was classic, elegant, and steeped in the quiet dignity of old money. Olivia's second call was to her best friend and business partner, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was the co-founder of their boutique PR agency, Vance & Bennett, specializing in crisis management for some of the city's most powerful families. Ellie, she said, sinking into a plush armchair, how was the doctor? Is baby boy Whitmore kicking up a storm? Eleanor's cheerful voice was a bright contrast to the weight pressing down on Olivia's shoulders. The baby's fine, Ellie, but he won't be a Whitmore. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. Oh, honey, what did he do? Olivia told it plainly in short, factual bursts. The scene, the girl, the pajamas. She left out the emotion, focusing only on the facts. Each word tasted like poison on her tongue, but she forced her voice to stay steady, willing the sharp pain in her chest to stay buried until the war was won. Halfway through, her throat tightened, a traitorous heat stinging her eyes. For a split second, she nearly let the sob rise. Then she crushed it down, dragging herself back into ice. Eleanor listened without a word, her shock bleeding through the line. That absolute unfiltered bastard, Eleanor finally hissed, her voice edged with venom. I never trusted him. He always looked at you like you were just another trophy on the shelf. So, what do you need? A place to hide? A pint of pistachio gelato and a bottle of, well, sparkling cider for you. I need you at the office, Olivia cut in, her tone all business. Pull every file we have on Whitmore Holdings. Every press release, every crisis we've managed, every internal memo we've touched. I want every vulnerability, every soft spot. We built his polished image. Now we dismantle it. Eleanor, a PR genius in her own right, didn't need more explanation. You're not just divorcing him. You're going for the empire he built his name on. He tied my value to his surname, Olivia said flatly. I'm taking both back. Consider it done, Eleanor said, a new note of respect in her voice. I'll have everything digitized and locked behind secure servers by morning. Your war room is officially open for business. Just as Olivia ended the call, a soft knock rattled the door. It was Julian. His face was a thundercloud of restrained fury, a slim leather briefcase in hand. "The suite is booked for a month," he said, closing the door behind him. "Helena Vaughn is ours. She's canceling her Napa trip to meet us first thing tomorrow morning. She's intrigued." "Good," Olivia said, motioning for him to sit. "Liv, you don't have to be strong right now," Julian murmured, his voice softening as he studied his sister, really saw her. He saw the faint purple bruises of exhaustion under her eyes, the rigid line of her jaw. "You can fall apart. I'll handle everything." Olivia shook her head, a single sharp motion. "I fell apart for 5 years, Julian. A little piece every day, so slowly I didn't even realize it. I let him shrink me, shape me into the perfect corporate wife. That's over. I'm not falling apart. I'm putting myself back together." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with an intensity Julian hadn't seen since she fought tooth and nail for her first big client. "I want to know about the prenup, every line, every loophole." Julian flipped open his briefcase. "It's airtight, Liv. Henry's lawyers made sure of that. You get a generous settlement, the Sonoma house, alimony for 10 years. It's all designed to keep you comfortable and quiet. But, there's the fidelity clause," Julian said, a predatory grin curling at the corners of his mouth for the first time that night. "Dad insisted on it. He wouldn't let you sign without it. If the marriage ends because of documented infidelity on his part, a penalty kicks in." "How big a penalty?" "It's not just money," Julian explained, his voice humming with sudden energy. "The clause requires a transfer of non-voting shares in Whitmore Holdings. At the time, it was a token, 5%, a little incentive to keep him faithful." Olivia's mind raced. 5% of a multi-billion-dollar empire was no token. "Exactly," Julian confirmed, reading her face. "And more importantly, it makes you a shareholder with real leverage, a voice at the table." A plan crystallized in Olivia's mind, sharp and lethal. A voice was all she needed. She knew the company's secrets. She had helped craft its public narrative. 5% wasn't an ending. It was a foothold. "We're going to need undeniable proof of the affair," Olivia said flatly. "His arrogance will be our biggest asset," Julian replied, a wicked gleam in his eye. "He won't believe you have the guts to fight. He'll be careless. In the meantime, I've already hired a private investigator, the best I know. His name is Adam Croft, ex-MI6. He'll find everything." Olivia rose and moved to the window, staring out at the city lights flickering to life below. This was a city of sharks and kings, a place where fortunes rose and fell in the span of a single heartbeat. For 5 years, she had watched from the sidelines. Now she was a player. "Tell Adam Croft to start with a junior analyst at Whitmore Holdings," she said, her reflection a ghostly outline against the deepening sky. "Her name is Chloe Mercer." As she spoke, Olivia felt the last fragile thread of the old her snap clean. No more hesitation, no more second-guessing. Whatever warmth she had once clung to was gone. All that remained now was a cold, merciless clarity, and for the briefest moment, a chill crawled up her spine. The quiet horror that in fighting Henry's cruelty, she might become just as ruthless. She promised herself she would know when to stop. Henry Whitmore was not a man used to being disobeyed. When Olivia had walked out, he fully expected her to run straight to her parents' estate in Palo Alto, where he could follow, present a half-hearted apology wrapped in a Cartier bracelet, and have it all smoothed over by the next dinner party. Her silence was far more unsettling than any outburst could have been. By the time he'd unceremoniously dismissed a now sobbing Chloe Mercer, "Get dressed and get out. You've caused enough damage," and tried Olivia's cell for the 10th time, only to hit voicemail yet again. A cold dread had begun to crack through his arrogance. This wasn't following his script. When his phone finally rang, he snatched it up, expecting Olivia's name. Instead, it was his lead counsel. "Henry," came Arthur Finch's gravelly, uneasy voice. "I just got a call from Julian Bennett. He's retained Helena Vaughn." Henry felt the jolt like an electric shock. "Helena, the matrimonial assassin. You didn't hire Helena Vaughn for an amicable settlement. You hired her to salt the earth." "She can't touch us," Henry barked, pacing the vast, echoing living room. "The prenup is a fortress, and the fidelity clause is exactly what makes you vulnerable," Arthur interrupted dryly. "Julian was insistent on it. I told you at the time not to be reckless, but you were so sure you could control this. Don't lecture me, Arthur, Henry snapped. Fix it. Offer her more. Double the settlement. I don't think this is about money anymore, Arthur said grimly. This is about pride, and a Bennet's pride is a dangerous thing. Arthur was right. This was Olivia. But not the Olivia Henry thought he owned. The quiet, polished wife he'd married would have folded. This new Olivia moved with a cold, terrifying precision. The first public strike came less than 48 hours later. Subtle. A masterpiece of PR warfare that only a few insiders would grasp at first, but its ripple was instant and brutal. An anonymous tidbit surfaced in Market Murmurs, a high-stakes financial gossip column run by the infamously sharp Victor Kane. Vance and Bennett PR had a long but cautious history with Kane, feeding him harmless leads to bury stories when needed. This time, the item read, which high-flying CEO of a publicly traded real estate empire is about to watch his carefully constructed tower crack from the inside out? Sources whisper the trouble isn't in the boardroom, it's in the bedroom. A scandal brewing behind closed doors may soon have major shareholders asking if the man at the helm can still steer the ship. Watch this space. It named no one. It was pure insinuation. But for the tight-knit circle of West Coast investors and analysts, the description pointed directly at Henry Whitmore. Whitmore Holdings stock, which had been on a steady climb, suddenly wobbled. It dropped a point, then another. It wasn't a crash, but it was a tremor. Exactly as the column had predicted, a signal of uncertainty. Henry stared at the Bloomberg terminal, a vein pulsing angrily at his temple. It was her. It had to be. It had her signature all over it. A precise, surgical strike at his most delicate pressure point, his reputation. He had given her a front-row seat to his empire, and she had been taking notes. His counterattack was crude, brute force born of panic and rage. He called the bank and with a single barked order, froze the joint accounts and canceled every one of Olivia's credit cards. He thought he would starve her out, humiliate her, force her to crawl back. It backfired spectacularly. Olivia, secure in her suite at the Fairmont and backed by the deep Bennett family wealth, didn't even notice for an entire day. When she did, she and Julian turned Henry's petty cruelty into yet another weapon. Helena Vaughn's office quietly released a carefully worded statement to the press. It expressed deep disappointment that a man of Mr. Whitmore's stature would resort to such mean-spirited tactics against his 8-month pregnant wife, leaving her suddenly cut off and stranded without access to resources. The narrative was a masterstroke. Olivia was no longer just a discarded millionaire's wife. She was a vulnerable, expectant mother bullied by a cold-hearted tycoon. Public sympathy, a currency Henry had always assumed was his by default, swung violently in her favor. The whispers were no longer just financial gossip. They were human drama. Meanwhile, Olivia zeroed in on the next phase of her plan. She knew that to truly destroy Henry, she needed more than just the affair. She needed to hit the very bedrock of his company. With the files Eleanor had compiled, she and Julian spent days dissecting over a decade of Whitmore Holdings dealings. "He's squeaky clean on the surface," Julian muttered, rubbing his eyes at dawn after another all-nighter. "His legal team is airtight, every deal polished to perfection." "No one is perfectly clean," Olivia countered, her eyes locked on a prospectus for one of the company's biggest recent acquisitions, a massive waterfront redevelopment in Oakland called Solace Point. "Henry's flaw isn't sloppy paperwork," she said. "It's his arrogance. He always thinks he's the smartest man in any room, that he can bend the rules right under everyone's nose." She tapped a line item buried in the budget for the Solace Point project: environmental remediation costs. They're ridiculously low for a site that used to house a chemical plant. He had bragged about it at the Winter Gala, how he'd snapped up the land for a steal and how his team had innovative methods to cut the cleanup budget. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked. "I'm thinking his innovation is probably code for something illegal," Olivia said coolly. "He sees environmental regulations as a nuisance, just red tape slowing down his profit margins. And the thought of families living above poison just to pad his ego makes my blood run cold. Find out who signed off on the environmental impact report. Find out exactly which corners he cut." It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but it was a starting point. While Julian unleashed his legal team on the Solace Point project, Olivia made her boldest move yet. She decided to deal with the other woman herself, not for revenge, but for information. Adam Croft, the ex-MI6 investigator, had already handed over his first findings. Chloe Mercer, 23 years old, from a blue-collar family in Richmond, buried under student debt from a business degree at San Francisco State. Hired as a junior analyst at Whitmore Holdings 18 months ago. She was ambitious, bright, and, judging by her curated social media, desperate to look more glamorous and successful than she really was. She was, Olivia realized, the perfect prey for a man like Henry. Impressionable, hungry, and entirely disposable. And Henry had already disposed of her. According to Croft's report, her company email had been cut off and her building access revoked the morning after Olivia walked out. She was jobless and undoubtedly terrified. Olivia found her address, a drab walk-up in Oakland. She didn't send a lawyer. She didn't send an investigator. She went herself. Chloe opened the door after the third knock. Her face blotchy from crying, hair pulled back in a sad, greasy knot. She wore baggy sweatpants and an old college hoodie, a pitiful contrast to the silk and marble world she'd just been ejected from. When she saw Olivia, heavily pregnant and poised on her doorstep, her eyes filled with a jumble of fear and disbelief. What do you want?" Chloe stammered, her hand reflexively trying to push the door closed. Olivia lifted one hand, not to threaten, but to stop her. The gesture was gentle but commanding. "I'm not here to yell at you, Chloe," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I'm here to talk. May I come in?" Stunned into silence, Chloe stepped aside, letting Olivia into the cramped, cluttered apartment. It smelled like stale takeout and raw anxiety. "He fired you, didn't he?" Olivia asked, standing in the middle of the tiny living room. Chloe nodded miserably, hugging herself. "He said I was a liability. Security made me pack up under watch. I didn't even get to take my own things. He did the same thing to me," Olivia said simply. "He canceled my credit cards. He tried to leave me with nothing." This seemed to confuse Chloe. "But you're Olivia Bennett Whitmore. Your family." "He didn't see me as Olivia Bennett," Olivia corrected her gently. "He saw me as an asset, a possession that stopped working properly, just like he saw you." They were both silent for a heartbeat, the truth hanging there between them, an unexpected, fragile bridge connecting two women who should have been bitter enemies. "What do you want from me?" Chloe asked, her voice thin and trembling. "I want to know what he used you for," Olivia said, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Men like Henry don't just use women for sex. They use them to hide things. What project were you working on? What documents did he have you touch? What did he make you handle that you didn't fully understand?" Chloe's face turned chalk white. She sank onto her sagging sofa, all her defiance gone. "The Solace Point project," she whispered. "I was on the acquisitions team. He made me reformat some engineering reports from an outside firm. He told me it was just to tidy up the numbers for an internal presentation, make them look cleaner." "Do you still have the original reports?" Olivia asked, her pulse hammering. This was it. The crack in his armor. "I have them on a flash drive," Chloe admitted, her eyes darting to a cheap laptop on the coffee table. "I made a copy. He was so adamant that the originals be wiped. It felt wrong." Olivia felt a rush of quiet triumph. Henry's arrogance had made him careless. He'd used a junior analyst to manipulate sensitive data, never imagining she'd keep a backup, never dreaming his wife would come looking for it. "Chloe," Olivia said, her voice softening just slightly, "Henry will try to bury you. He'll call you incompetent, a stalker, a liar. He'll drown you in legal fees and blacklist you from every firm in the Bay Area. Or you can help me help you." "Why would I help you?" Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because he's our common enemy," Olivia said, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "I'm fighting for my son's future. You should fight for yours. Give me that flash drive. Sign an affidavit describing exactly what he made you do. In return, my lawyer Helena Vaughn will represent you. We'll set up a trust in your name, enough to pay off your debts and start fresh, far away from him. And we'll make sure the world knows you were a pawn, not a conspirator." It was a lifeline, a clear choice between ruin and a clean slate. Chloe looked at the powerful, pregnant woman standing before her, and in that moment, she didn't see an enemy, but an unlikely savior. With trembling hands, she reached for her worn laptop bag, unzipped it, and pulled out a small silver flash drive, holding it out like an offering. "He's a monster," Chloe whispered. "Yes," Olivia replied, taking the flash drive carefully. "And we're going to show him what happens to monsters." The tiny flash drive felt heavier than it should have. A key, a weapon, a sliver of plastic and metal that could dismantle Henry's entire kingdom. Back in the gilded quiet of the Fairmont suite, Olivia and Julian huddled with Helena Vaughn, a woman whose sleek bob and razor-sharp eyes seemed to pierce straight through lies. The files on the drive were damning. Julian's legal team, working alongside a top forensic accounting firm, cross-referenced Chloe's saved reports with the official documents Whitmore Holdings had submitted to the city for Solace Point. What emerged was brazen fraud. The original environmental report from the independent firm, Geotech Solutions, outlined extensive soil contamination, lead, industrial solvents, requiring a cleanup budget close to $50 million. The cleaned-up version Chloe had been forced to produce, the one Henry's team actually filed, put the cost at just $5 million. Key sections were missing, figures had been doctored, and the executive summary was rewritten to bury the severity of the hazards. Henry hadn't just cut corners, he'd buried a toxic wasteland under the branding of a luxury waterfront revival. "This isn't just a slam-dunk civil suit," Helena said, her tone coldly pleased. "This is criminal. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, plus blatant environmental law violations. The Attorney General's office will eat this up." "So we leak it now?" Julian asked, hungry for the kill. "No," Olivia said, her voice calm but iron-strong. "Not yet. If we go public too soon, he'll spin it. He'll twist the narrative, hide or destroy what's left. Right now, we have surprise on our side. We can't waste it." She was thinking like the PR strategist she was, ruthlessly precise. A messy leak would create a circus of headlines that Henry's war chest could withstand. The takedown had to be surgical, one devastating blow, impossible to dodge. "The annual shareholders meeting for Whitmore Holdings is in 3 weeks, Olivia said, glancing at the calendar on the coffee table. "That's his stage, where he plays the untouchable visionary. That's where we hit him. And that's where we end this." The plan was bold. They would assemble an airtight dossier, Chloe's sworn affidavit, a side-by-side comparison of the doctored and original reports, and a legal opinion detailing Henry's potential criminal exposure. They wouldn't leak it to the media. They would place it straight into the hands of the board of directors and key institutional investors, right in the middle of the shareholders' meeting. It would be an ambush in broad daylight. While Julian and Helena's team worked in secret, Olivia turned her attention to another battlefield, her personal safety. She knew Henry would be hunting for her, trying to pull her back into his control. She needed to disappear in plain sight. She quietly moved out of the Fairmont, leaving Julian to settle the final bill. Through a discreet real estate agent recommended by Helena, she leased a beautiful, fully furnished brownstone in Pacific Heights. It was elegant but low-key. A private fortress with its own hidden garden, worlds away from the cold, showy luxury of her old penthouse. She hired her own security detail, former Mossad operatives who were loyal to no one but her paycheck. Her days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings on conference calls with her legal and PR team planning the strike, afternoons focused entirely on herself and her baby boy. She did prenatal yoga, ate organic meals delivered daily from a boutique grocer, and slowly turned a spare bedroom into a soft green and cream nursery, a nest for the son she would raise on her own terms. But at night, when the calls ended and the guard shift changed, exhaustion settled deep in her bones. Some evenings she'd wake, gasping from dreams of the betrayal, her hands trembling against her belly as she whispered silent promises to her son that she wouldn't break. She would not fail him. He would be a Bennett, not a Whitmore. His legacy would be one of strength and integrity, not ruthless ambition. One evening, Eleanor dropped by with a box of pastries and a folder brimming with intel. She sank into an armchair in Olivia's cozy new library. "The rumors are snowballing," Eleanor reported, flipping through the pages. "Henry's losing his grip. The stock is still down 5 points. Competitors are circling like sharks sensing blood in the water." "Good," Olivia said, sipping chamomile tea. But Eleanor's businesslike tone softened as she studied her friend. Liv, are you okay? You're handling this like a five-star general, but at the end of the day, you're still you. A very pregnant you. And your husband just blew up your entire life. Olivia placed a protective hand on her belly, feeling the steady, comforting kick from within. The woman I used to be, Ellie, she wouldn't have been okay. She would have cried for a week, then let him buy her silence with a 10-carat diamond and another empty promise. She would have let him shrink her again. She looked at her best friend, eyes clear and calm. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. He killed her. When I saw that girl in my pajamas, it was like a spell snapped. I saw the last 5 years exactly as they were. I wasn't his partner. I was his prize. She paused, voice steady. And the moment a prize grows a mind of its own, it gets replaced. He didn't just cheat on me, he declared me obsolete, and I will not be made obsolete. Meanwhile, Henry was spiraling. His private investigators kept coming up empty-handed in their search for Olivia. The Bennett family had closed ranks so tightly around her that not even the most expensive surveillance could penetrate the silence. He was a man who had always operated with every scrap of information at his fingertips. Now he was stumbling blind in the dark. The peace and market murmurs had been followed by smaller, sharper jabs in other financial outlets. The aura of invincibility he had built so carefully now felt thin and brittle. He was hemorrhaging money on lawyers and fixers. He was distracted, bad-tempered, and paranoid. He snapped at senior staff, barked reckless directives in board meetings, and drank too much alone at night in the vast, echoing penthouse, which now felt less like a palace and more like a solitary prison cell. Every night he called Arthur Finch, demanding updates, demanding solutions, demanding control. "She's preparing for a war, Henry," the old lawyer cautioned him. "Helena Vaughn isn't filing motions for spousal support. She's subpoenaing corporate documents. They're not just coming for the marriage, they're coming for the business." "Let 'em look," Henry sneered, though a sick twist curled in his gut. "There's nothing to find." But then he thought of Solace Point. He thought of the environmental reports he'd doctored, the shortcuts he'd forced through. He'd done it for years on smaller projects, a quiet fudge here, a gentle push there. It was how the game was played. He had never imagined those secrets would be turned into weapons, especially not by his wife. He had always kept his life neatly compartmentalized. He thought of Olivia back then, the soft-eyed girl who would flinch when he raised his voice, who would forgive him anything if he whispered enough pretty lies. That version of her was gone, and this new one would gladly burn him alive with his own sins. He'd believed that what happened behind boardroom doors could never leak into his marriage. His spiraling paranoia eventually pointed him to Chloe Mercer. He was sure Olivia had tried to reach her. He sent one of his consultants, a blunt, intimidating ex-security enforcer, to lean on her. But when the man arrived at her Oakland apartment, she was gone. The landlord told him she had paid her lease in full and vanished without leaving a single forwarding detail. Chloe had disappeared just as completely as Olivia had, and now the shareholders' meeting was only a week away. Henry was obsessively preparing for it, convinced it was his grand chance to claw back control. He rehearsed every word of his earnings report, polished the pitch for a shiny new expansion project, and told himself he would drown out every whisper of scandal with sheer confidence and ambition. He would remind the board, the investors, the entire city, and Olivia that he was untouchable. He was Henry Whitmore. His name was on the building, and this was his battle for perception. He had no idea he was walking into an execution. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was more than a room. It was a symbol. It was the heartbeat of old San Francisco, a hallowed space where fortunes had been made and legacies sealed for generations. Even the air felt rich, perfumed with designer fragrance and the faint, sharp tang of ambition. On this gleaming June morning, it was Henry Whitmore's personal stage, the scene for Whitmore Holdings' annual shareholders meeting, and he was its undisputed star. He stood at a polished oak podium, bathed in a warm, deliberate spotlight. Behind him, the Whitmore Holdings logo glowed on a massive screen, a symbol of unassailable stability. In front of him sat a sea of cultivated power, 12 board members in the front row, stone-faced guardians of billions in generational wealth. Behind them, rows of institutional investors and analysts from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and other kingmakers whose notes could sway entire markets. And at the very back, a cluster of financial reporters from the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Forbes. Sharks in tailored suits, waiting for even the smallest scent of blood. Henry was in his element. His charisma radiated like a heat wave, magnetic, practiced, irresistible. His voice, smooth and resonant, rolled through the ballroom like a promise. And so, as we look ahead to the next fiscal year, he was saying, his smile the very image of command. These projections aren't just strong, they stand as proof of what has always defined this company: vision, resilience, and above all, integrity. He paused on the last word, letting it hang like an oath. He painted a picture of record-breaking quarters, flawless international expansions, and a stock that, if one overlooked the recent unexplained stumble, was outperforming expectations. Our foundations are bedrock, he said, his watch, a discreet Patek Philippe, catching the light as he gestured confidently. Our name remains a global standard for excellence. We have not just reached our targets, we have outstripped them again and again, and I assure you, the best is yet to come. He pivoted effortlessly to the crown jewel of his domestic ambitions. Our flagship waterfront project, Solace Point, breaks ground next month. It will redefine Oakland's skyline and generate returns that will benefit this company for decades to come. He was flawless, weaving his tale so completely that the muted rumors felt petty, almost laughable. Board members exchanged subtle nods, analysts jotted glowing notes, even the skeptical reporters leaned in, recalibrating their headlines. He was drowning the whispers in the sheer force of his presence. At exactly 10:15 a.m., the towering gilded doors at the back of the ballroom swung silently open. It wasn't loud, no dramatic slam, but the change in the room's air was instant and undeniable. A shaft of bright morning sunlight sliced through the ballroom's hushed opulence. And standing calmly in that light was a single poised silhouette. As the door swung shut behind them, her figure came into sharp focus. A collective, unconscious intake of breath rippled through the ballroom. Whispers ignited like dry brush touched by flame. A Reuters journalist leaned in to hiss at his photographer, gesturing urgently. A rival CEO seated in the third row let a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Framed in the doorway was Olivia Bennet Whitmore. She was not the weeping, humiliated wife the tabloids had painted her to be. She was a vision of controlled power. Her cobalt blue dress cut through the room's muted sea of gold and dark wood like a blade, a bold banner of defiance. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability but a raw symbol of unstoppable life force. She stood regal and unshakable, her hair swept back into a severe knot that accentuated the flawless, resolute lines of her face. Her expression was pure Arctic calm, so cold, so composed that it struck fear deeper than any outburst could. She was flanked by Julian Bennett, his face carved in granite fury, and Helena Vaughn, her eyes glittering with keen, surgical intelligence, sweeping over the audience like a general assessing a battlefield. Henry froze. Somewhere behind him, the teleprompter scrolled dutifully on, but the words might as well have been in another language. The empire he'd crafted to feel invulnerable had just been breached by the very woman he had discarded as expendable. He saw her, and for the first time in his entire gilded life, he felt real fear. This was not the gentle, pliant Olivia he had molded for half a decade. This was a stranger. This was a reckoning, standing in the gilded heart of his domain. He clawed for composure, his mind skidding in panic. This is a private meeting," he stammered, his voice cracking as its practiced timbre slipped. But it was already too late. The narrative, the spotlight, everything had shifted. No one cared about the titan at the podium anymore. Every eye in the room was locked on the silent, immovable force at the back. Olivia did not speak. She did not stride forward. She simply stood, letting the raw chaos of her presence spread like a storm cloud. Then Julian and Helena began to move. Not with aggression, but with the solemn purpose of an honor guard. In their hands, they carried thick spiral-bound dossiers. Moving down the front row, they placed one copy in front of each of the 12 board members. The covers were stark white, the title printed in a simple, unadorned black font, a report on corporate governance and potential liabilities at Whitmore Holdings, prepared by the office of Helena Vaughn. Henry watched, paralyzed, as Richard Sterling, the eldest and most influential board member, leaned forward and opened the first page. The 70-year-old patriarch of the board, Richard Sterling, whose family had been shaping the city since the gold rush, picked up the report with a faintly irritated scowl. He flipped it open. His frown deepened. He slipped on his half-moon reading glasses and leaned closer. His eyes paused, widened almost imperceptibly, then flicked rapidly across the page. His color drained, pale spots blooming under his thin skin. He turned a page, then another. His breathing became shallow, audible in the hush. Up and down the front row, the same scene played out. One by one, the pillars of Henry's carefully constructed empire watched that empire crack, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. The only sound in the cavernous ballroom was the soft, relentless rustle of turning pages, the quiet birth of a corporate catastrophe. Henry's heart slammed wildly in his chest. Sweat gathered cold at his hairline. He didn't need to read a single page to know exactly what they held. Solace Point, Chloe Mercer, the falsified reports. The firewall he'd trusted to keep his moral rot hidden had just gone up in flames, and Olivia had struck the match. When every board member had their copy, Olivia began to walk. The central aisle parted for her, wordless and reverent, as if for royalty. Her slow, deliberate steps were the only movement in a ballroom suspended in dread. The crisp click of her heels against the polished parquet floor sounded like the ticking of a doomsday clock. She didn't glance left or right. Her eyes stayed locked on her husband, the predator advancing on prey caught with nowhere left to run. She stopped at the foot of the stage, forcing Henry to look down at her. The subtle angle flipped the power dynamic that had governed their marriage for years, and everyone in that room felt the shift. In the crushing hush, her voice rang out, not loud, but so clear and precise it seemed to slice the air itself. "Hello, Henry?" "Get out!" Henry rasped, his voice, once velvet smooth, now shredded with panic. "You have no right to be here." "On the contrary," Olivia interrupted, her icy composure a terrifying foil to his crumbling facade. She rested a hand gently on her belly. "I have every right. I'm a shareholder, or rather, my son is. I'm simply here to protect his stake in this company." She paused, her eyes drilling into his. "And Henry, I must say, I am deeply concerned that his inheritance appears to be built on a foundation of systematic criminal fraud." A stunned, unified gasp ripped through the room. The word, fraud, spoken out loud. The unthinkable dragged into the cold, merciless light. "That is a baseless, slanderous lie," Henry roared, blotchy red climbing his neck and cheeks. He jabbed a shaking finger at her. "You're just a bitter, humiliated woman, trying to destroy me." "Am I?" Olivia's tone didn't so much as waver. "Then perhaps," Olivia said, her tone razor-sharp, "you can clarify a few things for your board." She took a step closer, her presence now towering despite standing feet below the stage. "I invite you to explain why there are two conflicting environmental impact reports for the Solace Point project in this dossier. One from Geotech Solutions, detailing nearly $50 million in required toxic waste remediation, and the one you submitted to the city, budgeting for only $5 million. She let the words sink like poison. Then she pressed harder. "Perhaps you can explain the sworn affidavit from your former analyst, Ms. Chloe Mercer, who testifies under penalty of perjury exactly how you coerced her into doctoring that report. How you told her it was just to clean up the numbers for an internal presentation, when, in reality, you were defrauding the city of San Francisco, and every single investor in this room." She paused, and then, like a final, surgical strike, her voice dropped to a deadly hush that nonetheless carried to the farthest corners of the ballroom. "Explain to them, Henry. Explain to the mothers and fathers on your board how you plan to build family apartments and a children's playground, on top of soil still saturated with industrial solvents and lead. Tell them what kind of man you really are." It was not just a corporate killing. It was a public moral execution delivered with the unflinching precision of a surgeon. Henry stood there, jaw working soundlessly, gasping like a beached fish. He glanced desperately at the board for support, for any flicker of loyalty. All he saw was icy outrage and raw contempt. He saw men and women who valued their fortunes and legacies above all, and now knew he had put both at risk. Arthur Finch, who had been reading through the report with growing dread etched into every line of his face, stepped up beside Henry. He leaned in, voice low and final. It's over. Don't say another word. Henry's shoulders buckled as if the bones inside had dissolved. The fight drained from him, replaced by the cold vacuum of complete ruin. Richard Sterling, ancient and immovable, rose slowly to his feet. He removed his glasses and pinned Henry in place with a stare that felt like the weight of history pressing down. "Mr. Whitmore," Sterling said, his voice grave and implacable, "this board has now been made aware of allegations so severe they threaten the very survival of this corporation. They reveal an appalling collapse of leadership and a profound betrayal of fiduciary trust." He lifted the report slightly, like an executioner revealing the blade. "In light of this evidence, and to contain the inevitable legal and financial disaster your actions have caused, I, on behalf of this board, demand your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman, effective now." The silence that followed was total. The silence of a man witnessing his empire vanish before his eyes. Henry looked out at what remained of his world. The predatory gleam in the journalist's eyes, the tight-lipped disgust on his board's faces, and the cold, unforgiving stare of the woman he had once believed was nothing more than his possession. Olivia met his gaze for one final devastating moment. Then she gave a single, nearly invisible nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph, it was a nod of finality. A quiet punctuation mark closing a chapter of her life that would never reopen. She turned her back on him with the same regal composure she had carried through those gilded doors. She walked back up the aisle, past rows of stunned, silent witnesses, and stepped out through the grand ballroom doors, leaving Henry Whitmore stranded on his own stage, a dethroned king in a broken kingdom. In the end, it had never truly been about money or revenge. It was about reclamation. Olivia Bennet Whitmore walked away not just with a record-shattering settlement and a meaningful stake in the company she would help salvage, but with something infinitely more precious: herself. She reclaimed her name, her power, and the future of her child, Noah Bennet, born into a legacy of courage, not corruption. Henry Whitmore faded into a footnote on the back pages of business journals, a cautionary tale of a titan who mistook a diamond for glass and was destroyed by the brilliance he refused to see. So that's the end of Olivia's story. And my dear friends, are you still here with me at this hour? If you truly are, then I know there's something in this story that has touched your heart in its own quiet, stubborn way. So let's take a breath together and look at it honestly, like old friends whispering in the dark. What did we witness? Betrayal. Anger. Heartbreak so sharp it almost broke her. And yet, instead of letting it shatter her, Olivia chose to stand in the fire and forge herself anew. She could have stayed silent, playing the role everyone expected, the perfect ornamental wife. But she didn't. She reclaimed her name, her future, and her child's birthright. Not with fists, but with calm, fierce truth. The ancient Stoics teach us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Olivia is proof that when life's illusions burn down, you discover what's real: your courage, your voice, your dignity. Maybe you're facing your own betrayal, not from a lover, but maybe from a friend, a job, or even your own past choices. If you take anything from Olivia's journey, let it be this: you are not a victim of your circumstances unless you choose to be. Your scars can be your armor. Your silence can become your strategy. If her story lit a small fire in you tonight, don't let it flicker out. Carry it into tomorrow. And if it moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a spark of courage, and hit that subscribe button so you don't walk this road alone. Stay strong, stay kind, and remember, as the Stoics say, no man is free who is not master of himself. Thank you for being here with me, right to the very end. Until next time.